Child ghosts can be a daunting phenomenon, seemingly lost in time, sometimes playful, and often provoking intense feelings of sadness in those who witness them. Here are two of those innocent young presences. Canmore Recreation Centre. Late one freezing November night in 1983, Kevin Stevenson, a hockey rink attendant at the Canmore Recreation Centre in Alberta, Canada, was working alone in the centre. His job entailed driving the ice resurfacer around the rink while flooding it with a fresh layer of water, a line of work not well suited for anyone prone to chills. However, Kevin was to experience a different kind of chill. It was nearly quitting time, and Kevin's mind was focused on his work, all seeming quite normal, when a shiver suddenly shot up his spine. He had an ominous feeling that he was no longer alone, indeed that he was being watched. He stopped the tractor and looked around the ice rink, but there was no one there. He scanned the players' benches, penalty boxes, and stands, seeing no one at all present. He then glanced up to the top of the arena. Staring at him from the booth stood an unusual figure, a person who was very small with extremely long hair. It was difficult to discern from so far away, but it appeared to be a young girl. Kevin felt so terrified by the child's sudden appearance that he immediately began to cry uncontrollably. And then, just as suddenly, the girl vanished. Fortunately, Kevin didn't sight the ghost girl again for some time after that, but she didn't stay away forever. A few years later, he was again working alone in the arena's ice plant when the silence was broken by definite footsteps in the hallway. He stopped his work and nervously opened the door, but there was no one to be seen in the hallway. However, eerily, the footsteps continued. Determined to find their source, if only to prove that there was a rational explanation for the auditory phenomenon, Kevin searched all around the arena and throughout the change rooms, maintenance bays and offices. He even scoured every corner of the dance hall that was also situated in the recreation centre. There was definitely no one else present, so that he was certain of being completely alone. However, the phantom footsteps continued, plodding throughout the building. Kevin knew that the girl had returned. Although Kevin wanted to share his paranormal experiences with other co-workers, he kept them to himself out of certainty they would ridicule and tease him. So that he was very relieved when one day a colleague told him about an unnerving experience he'd had that was startlingly similar to what Kevin had witnessed. Tom Bisson had been working alone late one night when he had suddenly sensed eyes boring into the back of his neck. At the time working on the ice, he looked up and observed the girl's spectre staring down at him from the same window where Kevin had first spotted her. She appeared wispy and transparent, and looking at her gave Tom a terrible feeling. The two men had witnessed similar sightings separately, and they were about to share an experience together. The pair were the only two people working in the centre one night when they heard the girl calling out for her mother. Twice her soft voice called out, "Mummy, Mummy." Over time, Kevin and Tom realised that they were also not the only two people who had witnessed the ghost. A construction crew that had been hired to work in the arena after hours also reported seeing her, and the girlfriend of a maintenance staff supervisor saw her once as well. As more witnesses opened up and disclosed having heard or seen the girl, people also began to speculate about who she might be. Someone had heard that many years before the recreation centre was built, a young girl had drowned in the swamp that once existed in that spot. Sadly, her remains were never found. Her haunting history seems to have made the building feel far chillier than it has any earthly reason to be. Captain Campbell House. In 1965, Barbara Robertson and her family moved into a small 3-bedroom house at 406 Wood Street in downtown Whitehorse, Yukon, Canada. Strange things began occurring almost immediately, particularly in her baby's bedroom. One night, as Barbara was changing her daughter Liz, the infant's attention seemed drawn to something behind her mother's back. To Barbara, it was as if the girl was looking at someone who had entered the room, and she spun around only to see the room empty. The same phenomenon happened again another night, then another and another. Liz would always apparently see something and her eyes would grow wide. However, every time Barbara turned to check, there was no one there. As Liz became older, she increasingly disliked being in the room. Playing there gave her a bad feeling, as specifically she always sensed that someone was watching her. A few years on, Barbara's new baby, Douglas, had moved into the room. He was only 10 months of age when, one night, Barbara woke up suddenly. Unaware of what had woken her, all she knew was that she was surrounded by a real and oppressive sense of horror, that something was terribly wrong. The sound of a young child laughing hysterically cut through the silence, then abruptly stopped. Douglas was laughing in his room, but strangely starting and stopping again and again as Barbara listened from her bed. It was just as if someone was in his room with him, playing games and making the little boy giggle. Suddenly, the memory of her daughter Liz, seeing someone only she could see in that very room, came flooding back to Barbara. She jumped out of bed and rushed through the darkened house in order to find out what was happening. She stamped her bare feet extra loudly on the floor to ensure that if someone was in the room with Douglas, they would hear her coming. She opened the door slightly and peeked inside to see the baby standing up in his crib. He was smiling excitedly and pointing at the closet across the room, where the closet door was open, but with no one inside. Barbara often hid in the closet and would poke her head out with a loud peekaboo, a game Douglas loved. He would stand in his crib laughing and pointing just as he was at that moment. Although Barbara couldn't see anyone hiding within the shadowy closet, she felt as though her son could, and whoever was inside the closet was playing peekaboo with the enthralled boy. The Robertsons had purchased the house fully furnished and had uncovered its history little by little. Originally a log cabin, it had first been inhabited in 1906 by postmaster Dr. Frederick Warren Kane, then in the 1920s was owned by 2 riverboat captains, Campbell and Mackay. It became known as the Captain Campbell House, later accommodating a butcher called Gordon Armstrong, who in 1950 was elected as the first mayor of Whitehorse. He used one of the bedrooms as a personal office, but said that he never felt alone in that room. In fact, he often looked up from his work to see a small boy watching him or running through the walls. This was the very same room where Barbara's children had observed someone she could never see. Armstrong's accounts spread around the neighbourhood over the 1950s, and locals came to believe the house was haunted by a young boy 7 or 8 years of age who had drowned nearby during the previous decade. Barbara and her family moved out in 1977 after 12 years of creepy experiences. The next owner, Harold Ryder, told the Yukon Historical and Museums Association that a tourist once rented the property for a few days. Having not heard the ghostly tales about the house, he soon not only saw but also felt the spectre. At the end of a long day, the man was just starting to fall asleep when someone tapped his shoulder. The man rolled over just in time to catch sight of the youthful ghost running out of the room. He became so scared that he gathered up some bedding and marched straight outside, where he slept on the front lawn all night. After that, the Captain Campbell house remained empty and was used only for storage. As the house was later demolished in 2021, one can't help but wonder if that little boy is still attached to the site, running from room to room and eternally playing peekaboo in a shadow existence.